Hi, my name's Ron Vellon, and welcome to this video tutorial that I'm calling Diagnosing the System. What this means, why we call it Diagnosing the System, is that most elements of an organization can be looked at from what we call a systems perspective. What this means is that we're seeing the organization as a flow through of inputs, some kind of transformational activity with some kind of an output. In this video, what we're going to be doing is looking at how to figure out what's going on within an organization on three levels. We have the organizational level, that this is the broader context, could be a department or a division or the whole organization. We're going to look at it from the group or team level, and we're going to look at it from the individual level. And these are the three main levels within the organization when we look at understanding how organizations function, especially when it comes to leading change within them. So we're going to begin with the organizational level and see what an organizational system looks like broadly, so we can attempt to understand and perhaps diagnose what is going on from a change perspective. So we're going to use this diagram. And as we look at the organization level, we're going to see some things that might look familiar to you. Perhaps you have some insight from your direct experience. Maybe you see something that might have been mentioned in an organizational behavior class. Maybe something's come up in a leadership context. Perhaps you saw something in the context of creating or managing strategy. Whatever your experience is, this is a snapshot of what we need to look at and understand if we're going to try to figure out what might be going on within an organization, broadly speaking. As I said earlier, there are three main structural elements within the diagnostic model that we're using. And this, by the way, comes from Tom Cummings and Chris Worley's book, Organization Development and Change. This is the 10th edition. So thanks to them for creating this great model, which I'm going to be using now today. On the organization level, so this could be the whole organization, it could be your department, it could be a division, a region. Very similar kinds of architectures we can use when looking at some kind of a diagnosis. Let's assume we're looking at the whole organization. So every organization has its inputs. The first is the impact of the general environment. What we mean by that is the main environment in which the organization functions. So what's the political climate? What's the geographic climate? And perhaps the economic climate. What is going on around the organization that will have an impact? Then we have the task environment, and this is a little more specific. This is about perhaps competitors, suppliers, populations from which to draw employees. Maybe you're creating upheaval that other industries are responding to, or you're responding to pressure from other industries. Perhaps your technology is usurping or upsetting the marketplace in some way. So we have competitors, employees, as in other words, employee bases. We might be looking at supplier, infrastructure, the things that directly impact the work we do. And then we have the enacted environment. The enacted environment is the environment that people seem to think they're operating in. In other words, the interpretation of the task and general environments. In other words, it's how the leadership and employees see and seem to be working with the information at hand. Call it the interpreted reality. This can be a little harder to figure out because it's not just about what we see in terms of facts and data. This is about how people are taking it in and imbibing that information and how they see the world they're operating in. Now, once we have all of this, this is integrated through whatever strategy the organization is using. Now, it may be formalized, it may be informal. You know, if it's discussed over coffee one morning, or if it's a formalized, detailed plan put together by many people and perhaps consultants to help the organization find its direction. Whatever that strategy is, it takes in these three main elements. Whatever that strategy is, it integrates these three elements of the environment. Whether it's doing it well or not is a whole other story, but that's something for you to figure out if it comes up as an organizational change issue. Within the organization, there are five main components from an organization change point of view and from a diagnosis point of view. we look at now what we call the design components. The first design component is the structure. So this is simply organizational structure. Okay, so who reports to who? And what's really important about this is to also try to understand informal power structures. It's not easy to figure these things out. You may have an understanding of what the informal power structures are within the organization, but they don't show up on an organizational chart. So structure, this is the first priority, with some understanding of informal power structures is hugely valuable. Then we talk about technology. Now, what do we mean by technology? This could be manufacturing technology, certainly information technology, other tech that's used for processes. Perhaps you have something for customer service, inventory, product development, whatever the technology is you're using. Then we talk about management processes, and this is about how work gets done. Management processes are essentially the methods that are used for processing information and making decisions and helping to control the operations of the organization. And they also help organizations understand first how well it's performing, and then to detect and control any deviations from those goals and to help make relevant decisions, and then to communicate those results. So it really is a backbone functioning for those in management and leadership roles, so they can actually get their work done effectively and everyone is up to speed and informed with what's going on in the whole organization. Then human resources systems. What are human resources systems? Well, it's a lot of things you would be thinking about. Everything from hiring, firing, training and development, so org change and development, health and wellness, compensation, a lot of the things that we would associate with human resources. So we have these four things, but I said there were five. And the fifth one, although it's treated as a separate entity, we need to see these four things moving through or being integrated with the organization's culture. So big question, what's an organization's culture? Well, this involves a number of things. We can use different diagnostic tools. For example, there's something called the cultural web, which looks like different aspects of the organization's culture. We're trying to understand the values, not that the organization says, this is what we call espoused. We're trying to find the values that are actually in play. What is actually valued? This is the underpinning of organizational culture. And sometimes it can be difficult to find out what is actually valued. But it's typical to kind of work back from what are the behaviors that are reinforced. You know, there's an old expression that people vote with their feet, meaning people will say whatever they want, but how they behave is typically a reflection of what they actually value. Edgar Schein once called these values that are in play the underlying assumptions of an organization. And these are powerful. You know, when we look at culture, we need to look at norms or norms of behavior. We need to look at symbols and artifacts within the organization. We need to look at stories that people tell, how people decorate their offices. All of these things give us a sense of organizational culture. But the most important one to understand are the underlying assumptions. In other words, the values that are actually in play in the organization. And when you're talking about organization-wide, you're going to notice that there are subcultures within the organization that will all interact and interrelate with the broader organizational culture. So often we'll say that, you know, our culture is all about this or all about that. Very, very general terms. Really, really important to understand what this really means on a day-to-day basis for people, how they actually experience their culture. So these are the 5 elements of what we would call design. And ultimately, the inputs, once transformed and moved through the design components, generate outputs. And what are outputs? Well, we call this broadly organization effectiveness. But what do we really mean? We mean performance. We mean productivity. Stakeholder satisfaction. In other words, the performance of the company is good enough that the ownership is happy, shareholders are happy, and the people that are impacted by the organization, the customers, employees, people who have a stake in the organization, are also getting what they need. And another element of organization effectiveness is, again, a broader term, but something that's considered is the well-being of the people involved. It's not always measured, but this is something that typically we look at. If an organization performs really well, but people are really unhappy, that's probably not going to be sustainable. And now, of course, we think of environmental sustainability. Not everyone is, unfortunately, but this is something that more and more is becoming a front burner issue. So that's the organization level diagnostic model. When you're trying to figure out what's going broadly within an organization, this is a snapshot of how to see those components and try to figure out where you need to spend your time digging in order to understand what's going on. Here we are now at the group or team level of our diagnostic process. You'll see here that the structure from a high level has the same three-part layout. And what we need to understand is every group, every team, of course, operates within the broader organization structure, culture, and so on. So if we look at the inputs, the input for a team or a group, and I would even say a department, is not the same as the set of inputs that we have for the broader organizational setting. What are the inputs on a group or a team? First is the organization design. So this is when we get into, structure, organizational processes on a broad scale, things like that. The organizational culture, which we spoke about a few minutes ago, that was connected to the whole organization. That culture is going to encapsulate this team. In other words, a team has to function within that organizational culture, even though the team is likely to create its own culture within the organizational cultural setting. And in fact, this is done sometimes strategically, where teams or groups will deliberately want to break away from the organizational culture and structure and do its own thing, almost like a satellite entity. Not easy to do, but it certainly can be done and has been done. So the inputs on the team are the organization's design and its culture. Within the design components, what are we looking at? A lot of these things will be familiar to you if you've taken organizational behavior or you've done teamwork or done any kind of leadership development or have been a leader. I'm sure you've seen these things. The first is the task structure. How is the work actually structured? How are the tasks delegated? How work is assigned? All of these things are around task structure. Goal clarity. This has to do with the team or group's goals and its purpose. So the clearer it is, likely the more effective the team is going to be. This really needs to be clear. And oftentimes the team is left with the responsibility of really clarifying it and getting approval from the broader organization or whoever they're reporting to. Group composition. This is about group membership. Who are the individuals within the team? Do you have the right skill sets? Do you have the right personality complement? Skills, personalities, both of them matter. There may be times when you find that you have all this incredible talent on your team, but the team's not functioning well. And this is sometimes because you have too many people with the same skills or perhaps the same personalities. So good complementarity is really important, that you don't have redundant things like this. And in this way, your team will be more effective, or at least have a better chance. A common issue that occurs is there's a lot of technical skill, but not enough skill around the human dynamics. Again, it doesn't mean this team can't do well. So you may find the people who are actually members of this team are happy having an imbalance with more technical ability and having less of the interpersonal capability. Group norms, very powerful. I highly recommend you watch my video tutorial on group norms. It's also available on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. We're talking about norms of behavior, basically. Acceptable and reinforced behaviors within the group or the team. Everything from how meetings are conducted to when coffee breaks are taken, how much independence people have, how people relate to each other. There's so many norms. Most of the time, norms happen by accident. And by accident, I mean unconsciously. So we need to try to create good, effective norms. So I write in here conscious because we want to be aware of what kind of norms we're creating. And if there's a problem, you need to speak up early. You want to have good, effective, conscious norms. And there will be others that will happen without even realizing it sometimes. And the last one is overall team functioning. This is where the interpersonal stuff becomes paramount. It's how effective the team is, how people are getting along. Are people actually collaborating well if that's what they need to do? Are they sharing information well? Are they listening to each other? Are they supporting each other's work? All of these things fall into team functioning. Are the team members doing well personally within the team? This gets undervalued sometimes until it's too late, especially if the team's performing well. But a high-performing team that isn't taking care of its team members will not be sustainable in the long run. So some measure of well-being has to be integrated into it over time. But again, each team will have its own needs, and that has to be respected. So this is what we talk about when you think of design components for a group-level diagnostic model. All of what's taking place here results in some form of output. And instead of organization effectiveness, we call it team effectiveness. This is a simple pairing of performance, let's call it production, connected to quality of work life. This is the well-being component. When you have these two things working well together, you have amazing effectiveness within the team. A team that can adapt quickly, a team that is resilient, proactive, creative, all those amazing things that we look at in team effectiveness. When we're doing diagnosis, we start typically with looking at outputs and then we work backwards. So we'll start with outputs from a diagnosis point of view, because if the team's functioning really well, any kind of diagnosis may be because they're trying to be proactive and maybe avoid problems in the future. But usually there are signs early on, even if they're small. You might be getting a lot of production, but maybe this well-being side, like people are just burnt out or frustrated, that's when we go back and look at the design components. Are the goals clear? Is this task structure working well for this team? Is the team functioning the way it needs to? Are the norms supportive of team effectiveness? Do we have the right people on the team? Think of any team you've been on. Doesn't matter whether it's been university, college, work, volunteer, sports, whatever it is. These 5 elements come up over and over and over again and tend to be where we need to look to understand where an organization change opportunity might exist. And finally, we have the individual level diagnosis. For this one, we're going to start at the outputs and work backwards because that's really how diagnosis is done on the organizational level, team level, individual level, and so on. So what are the outputs for an individual? That means one person. We consider this in organization terms individual effectiveness. And if you've been around this organization change field or in human resources or a lot of management education, you hear this pairing of words, individual effectiveness, team effectiveness. And effective is a catch-all for a lot of different things. But what are we really talking about? Is the person satisfied in their job? And that can mean a few different things, but it usually means, are they contributing? Are they getting the support they need? Are they generally content in their work? Are they performing? Are they doing a great job getting the work done, getting the output and performance? Absenteeism. Are they taking time off? Now, of course, there are times when people are legitimately ill, whether physically or mentally, and that may have nothing to do with their work. Too often, though, maybe it's too stressful. Maybe their boss is not making things better. Maybe they're too demanding. Maybe the work culture is not helping them. If there's a lot of absenteeism, that is a big flag. Personal development, are they growing as people? Now, personal development and job satisfaction are pretty tightly linked. And this is because one of the elements of job satisfaction is if people feel like they're growing in their work. And so when you isolate the personal development side, sometimes it's difficult for the person to know if they're growing at times. But if people feel reasonably challenged and they're getting lots of opportunity to learn and take on either more responsibility or different responsibility, they're likely going to feel like they're growing in their work. And other growth that takes place outside of work may be a part of this as well. But this is what we're talking about specifically, personal development on the job. So if there's a problem with any of these, we go back and look at what are the design components of the person's work life. And that's what we mean here. It's not about the person itself being designed a certain way. Task identity. This is the degree to which people identify with their work. Do they feel like they're part of it? Do they see the output they're producing as a result of how they've contributed? In other words, can they see the links? I did this work and something happened. When people have a high level of task identity, that can give them a big leg up from the personal satisfaction, in other words, the job satisfaction and personal development point of view. Task significance. It's one thing to see that you're contributing to a specific output within your group, department, organization. But is the work you're doing, the tasks that you're completing, are they seen as significant? There's a story of Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's. And Dave really focused on cleanliness in his restaurants. He made a point of telling the person who was mopping the floor or sweeping the floor how important it was what they were doing to the success of the restaurant and to the company. Because it is and can be, for most people, a pretty menial task. And most of the time, people may not see the connection between a swept floor and a clean bathroom to the success of the restaurant. They won't see the significance of it. They can see if it's clean, like they can see the task identity, but does it really matter? And he made sure that they understood that it mattered. So task significance. Does the person see their work as being significant? And sometimes, maybe the majority of the time, it's the responsibility of their leader or perhaps even their colleagues and their peers to tell them not just that they did a good job, but that their work had an impact and makes a difference in the day-to-day life of the organization. Feedback about results. Not surprising. People want to know how they're doing. When are things going well? And when are things not going well? How can they improve? I typically refer back to a great model that I learned years ago in graduate school called the plus delta model. What's effective currently? And what do we need to see more of? That's the delta. The delta, of course, is a symbol for change. People want to know, where are they doing well? What is effective? What is contributing? And what does the organization need them to do more of or do better? Autonomy. Not everybody wants to be autonomous and independent. So this is a question mark. In other words, does the person have the level of autonomy that they really need to thrive? And that's the big question here. Can people thrive? As someone who teaches in business programs, I have a lot of autonomy. Now, it's not completely carte blanche. I can do whatever I want. I have to follow, certain frameworks within the educational system and, any requirements of the organizations I'm working with. But I still have a lot of autonomy to do what I think is best. And I get feedback all the time. Students will tell me, what's working. If I create that environment for them to tell me, they will give me information that will help me make changes as we go along to make the courses better and better. And the last one is skill variety. Like autonomy, this is not a one-size-fits-all thing. This is also a question. Does the person using more than just one skill? Most people like to use more than one skill. They want to use a full skill set, maybe where they feel the strongest. But not everybody wants to use a huge, broad range of skills all the time. That can be really tiring. Some people love it. Some people want to focus on 3 or 4 skills and use them over and over again. So the question here is the person getting a chance to use the skills to the level that they want and to the variety that they want? So these are the 5 main things we look at for an individual and their overall effectiveness. Task identity, this is how they see themselves as connected to the work they're creating and the impact on the organization. The significance, how significant is the work they're actually doing? In other words, they may see a direct connection to the work they're doing, but how important is the work they're doing? Feedback about results. How am I doing? It doesn't mean you walk up to someone every 20 minutes and say, hey, this is good or this is bad or whatever. But on a regular basis is to have conversations that are very simple. It doesn't have to be long and drawn out, just ongoing dialogue about what's working, what's not working, so you can make changes on the fly and people will feel that they are getting the insights so they can grow. How much autonomy do they have? How independent do they want to be? And are they at the level of independence that they need? And the skill variety, of course, is what variety of skills are they being given the opportunity to use, and does that line up with what they want to be doing? So this is the essence of the individual level diagnostic model. Before we wrap up, I'm just going to highlight a couple of things that were mentioned at different points in this video tutorial. So here we're looking at the 3 levels of diagnosis. We have the organizational level, the group or team level, individual level, and in between we would have departmental or region. Same basic process. When we're doing diagnosis, we look at the outputs and we ask ourselves, where is the itch we need to scratch? In other words, where is there something that's not working well? On an organizational level, we look at organization effectiveness, which includes performance, productivity, shareholder and stakeholder satisfaction. On the group level, we look at team effectiveness, which is the quality of work life within the team, and performance. Is the team performing the way it needs to? For the individual level, we talk about individual effectiveness, in which case we look at, is there job satisfaction? Are they performing well? Are they showing up? If there's a lot of absenteeism, we need to look at that. And personal development. Are they growing the way they want to and need to? This is where we start, and then we work backwards and we look at the design elements and probe. And how do we get this information? Ask for one-on-one interviews with people. We can do qualitative and quantitative research, which is basically how it occurs. Interviews are conducted, surveys are done, whatever is appropriate to get the information you need to understand where is the pain that needs to be resolved. So qualitative and quantitative research are the ways to do it. And principles that we've talked about in other video tutorials around understanding, root cause, which I sometimes refer to as the underlying issue. These are important ideas to understand as you're going through all this. This is essentially trying to find the root cause of a problem. If somebody is absent all the time, we could come to the conclusion that they're just looking for another job because they're bored. So if they're bored, why are they bored? Well, the root cause is going to be found in these design components. And that's what they're there for. One last note about the word diagnosis. I probably should have said this at the beginning. Diagnosis is based on an older model of leading change where whoever is trying to do the diagnosing, often it's a consultant, be it internal or external, is trying to understand the system in kind of a subject-object point of view. So it's like you going to see your doctor and you say your knee hurts when you bend it like this, and they go through a whole process to try to understand the root cause of your knee pain. In more current practice, this diagnosis is considered much more of a collaborative process. And there's another term that's become more present. In fact, it's called dialogic organization development. Through dialogue and conversation, the needs of the organization and the opportunities to improve are revealed. These are collaborative approaches, and that's something that can be discussed at a later date. So that's the essence of the diagnostic models on 3 levels from a systems point of view.